I think that now you should have my sound on. I hope you can hear me. So welcome to everyone. Sorry about that technical glitch. 3 months ago tomorrow, I started this YouTube channel with my lip tutorials, the lockdown insanity prevention tutorials, and there are, as of this moment on this channel, 2,255 subscribers, which is just amazing. Thank you so much. And a huge thank you to all the translators around the world who have been helping me to translate my films. Not helping me translate, they have been translating my films from English into, I think we're up to 17 different languages now. Not all of them, they're coming in bit by bit, but yes, I'm absolutely indebted to all their hard work for making it possible for my films to reach more people. We've had nearly 50,000 views on the channel so far. But what is really weird is that 2/3 of the viewers are not subscribers. So if you are watching this and if you're not a subscriber, then do please subscribe. Then you can even press the bell so you get a notification when a new film comes out, new video comes out. And thank you to all the people who have subscribed. That's absolutely wonderful. Now, I have been asking for about 2 weeks if you have questions about orchestral auditions, and that's what we're going to focus on today. And I've had some wonderful questions sent in to me, and they cover all sorts of different topics. Nerves, of course, the jury, the curtain, different tempi, the difference between an audition and real life. I thought that was a good one. About warm-ups, about in the audition itself, and then I had a cheeky question about my first audition, which is a very long time ago. So I can't see any questions at the moment other than, please can you switch your sound on? So I think we'll get started with the first question, which is from Fiona Sweeney. And she says, how long would you recommend to prepare for an audition? And that's a really difficult question to answer. I think, in a way, I remember in my first term going to music college, I remember buying my first Orchestral Excerpts book and thinking, well, I'm going to have to know all these by the time I leave college and start auditioning, so I might as well get started. So in a way, maybe 4 or 5 years isn't enough, and in a way, maybe 3 weeks is okay too. I think these days, generally speaking, you receive your information from the orchestra about a month before. That's a kind of rule of thumb. So I think that before a month before, you should already be feeling very comfortable with some of the standard repertoire. And I did put in my tips video, I did put a standard list of 20 excerpts, and I would guess that in every audition about 75% of those will appear. So day one at music college, I would say start thinking about your orchestral audition if that's the path you want to take. There's no such thing as too much time. Of course, there's always such thing as too little time. So I would say different types of preparation. In the audition tips video, I do break that down into suggesting that you start with doing tryouts for yourself about a month before, and then maybe 3 weeks before doing a tryout for other people, 2 weeks before with an audience. It's completely up to you, but something like a month before should be real serious focus on the day itself. So I hope that answers that question. Then Ebba Wallen asked, how do you warm up before an audition if you don't have a lot of time? And I think here, think about how much time you normally take to warm up. Do you normally take half an hour? Then maybe it's worth making sure that you've done that warm up in the hotel before you get there, or at home if it's in your hometown. And then having a sort of a top-up routine so that you know that pretty much within 5 minutes you could be a 0 to 60 in 5 minutes kind of warm-up. For me, that contains lots of harmonics and whistle tones, long notes, really just to focus on my air speed and that sort of thing. But it's completely up to you. Think about what your ideal warm-up routine is, whether that's 10 minutes or 45 minutes, and see if you can make a shorter version for on the audition day. Maybe you can do both. Maybe you can do the full warm-up before you arrive at the venue, and then just the 5-minute top-up when you get a room of your own. Then Xiu Chen asked, she wrote, thank you, I think that's a she. Thank you so much, Emily. I always feel very nervous in auditions. My fingers and legs become weak, even shaking. Oh, I know that one. Could you please tell me how to overcome the nervousness? Well, I think maybe the first thing to say here is it's not so much overcoming nervousness, because I think nervousness is in a way a kind of excitement, and somehow you need that excitement when you get on stage, whether that's as part of an orchestra or a soloist or a chamber musician. So I think it's more you should think more in terms of how can I live with this nervousness. I always say that adrenaline gives you superpowers. Sometimes you can listen so much more carefully when you're nervous that all your senses become heightened. You can smell things much more strongly. You can hear things much more strongly. You feel everything much more strongly. And that can give you superpowers to actually get further and do better than you thought you were capable of. So don't try and shut out nerves entirely, but of course we do need to learn to get on with them. What I can say is these days there are more and more opportunities for you to find answers in literature. There are more and more books about anxiety, podium anxiety. And don't be afraid to speak to a professional. There are lots of sports therapists and therapists who could help you with that, getting on stage with less nervousness. But try and break it down and figure out what it is that you're actually feeling. Is it nerves or is it excitement? You're keen to get this moment happening and to share your love of music with the audience, whether that's a jury or in a concert hall. So I hope that answered that question a little bit, but I know that feeling very well, shaking legs and shaking fingers. There are lots of, you can do wonderful things like meditation and Alexander technique and visualization. There are all sorts of methods to find out what speaks to you the best, I think. So don't think about it on the day. How can I get rid of these nerves? They're not going to go away. You need to find a way of managing them in your performing life. So this is sort of connected to that same question. I'm still not seeing any questions coming in live, so do shout if I go past anything too quickly. How can I have, this was the Stefania Moreno. How can I have a good sound and intonation when I'm really nervous? Well, I think that all starts in the practice room. I think you need to be very focused on your sound in your practice room and your intonation in your practice room. You're not going to suddenly become a different player in the audition. We were just talking about adrenaline giving you superpowers, and so you might even find yourself playing a little bit better than you did in the practice room or a little bit worse, but it shouldn't be a huge difference. So make sure that you focus on the things that are important to you in the practice room. They're not going to miraculously all happen in the audition room. What will happen in the presence of adrenaline is that you'll be able to hear a bit better. So it could be, if you think, actually, my sound and my intonation are much worse when I'm in a stressful situation, what might actually be happening is that in that stressful situation, you're just able to listen much better, that your ears are working much better. And so you might find that focusing better on in the practice room might help you with that. But otherwise, I think, see my answer to the question above. There is a lot of help out there in terms of literature, online, things like the Bulletproof Musician, the Audition Cafe. There are all sorts of platforms where you can get help, or go to a professional therapist to talk about what goes through your head, and to actually for yourself break down what it is that you're so very worried about. So I hope that helps a little bit there. Now, Wang Dankui Flute, I think, asked, do you have tips for trying the sound on stage before the audition? Now, bear in mind that in some auditions, you will be behind a screen and you might not be allowed to play anything other than the notes of the excerpt. So think very carefully about what do you need to play. And if it's tuning an A, maybe you don't play more than a low A and a D in your practice room when you're warming up or when you're tuning with a pianist. It might be, while you're tuning, it might be a good idea to sort of play different couple of octaves. Make sure that your high register is singing, so maybe a low, middle and high register A, to get a feel for whether the hall is very lively in the top register, for example. You might want to try a low D or E to just check that the low register is working, but I would not play too much because it could get you disqualified, and think very carefully about what you would like to test out before you start playing. Fiona Sweeney asked, can I use the sharp B-flat fingering you mentioned in the Patricia video for an audition? Yes, of course, if it works for you, and if you find that helps you. The most of the jury probably won't even know how to finger a B-flat on the flute anyway, so do whatever works. Your ears are your best judge. I use hundreds and hundreds of alternative fingerings when I'm playing, especially actually in the orchestra, when it's really important to have a wide range of not only dynamics but sort of colours of sound. So I use quite a lot of different fingerings to colour the sounds in the orchestra. Maybe I want a sound that's going to work better with blending with a violin which has got a lot of vibrato, or this note would work better with a colour which is going to work with a horn, or this sound is going to work better with a clarinet. So special fingerings, alternate fingerings are wonderful for that kind of flexibility. And just so see the standard fingering chart as being the starting point of your exploration of playing notes on the instrument. It's not standard, and most of the jury probably won't be a flute player anyway, so if it works, use it. Now this is a very complicated name. Embouchure flute fix. Do you think it's better with curtain or without? What is your feeling? And then that's related to flutist Josh, who asked, are all the rounds behind a screen at the Concertgebouw for audition? Thanks. And then Masters and Dreamers asked, what are your thoughts on the screen coming down in the final round? So I think I'll answer those three questions in one go, and say that in my orchestra we usually have 3 rounds of auditions, and the first 2 are behind a screen, and the final round is open. And I have to say, I like that system very much. When I was auditioning a long time ago, I actually loved playing behind a screen. I felt it gave me a freedom to really focus on what was important, and that's the sound that I'm making, and how that's communicating with the audience. And I understand that it's a strange feeling because it's not something we practice. So how can we change that? Well, of course we can practice with it. So when you're doing one of your tryouts, maybe try one of your tryouts behind a screen. Maybe at your school there are already mock auditions being held. I hope so. If not, why not ask? Let's try that. Or maybe your audition club, which I mentioned in the audition tips video, maybe you can try practicing behind a screen. It's a different feeling, but if you focus on what the benefits are for you, then I think you can really make it work to your advantage. As a jury member, I love having a screen because I'm not distracted by anything, what someone's wearing or what their instrument looks like or how they're moving when they're playing, or none of that is important. It's just how it sounds, which is, what's important for a musician. So I think having the different rounds, 2 rounds behind a screen and 1 round open, for me is an ideal situation. I think that since screens started being used for orchestral auditions, there has become a lot more equality in the orchestral and amongst orchestral musicians, male, female, black, white. I think it's a real, whether you're playing a gold flute or a silver flute or a wooden flute, all that matters is that you're a really good player and that you really understand the score, I think. So that's what the screen does. And I think it's got huge advantages on both sides of the curtain. Now I had a question here from Martin, thank you. Any good recommendations for a book on alternate fingerings? Not really. I think that alternate fingerings, this is the question we were just answering before if you just joined us, about alternate fingerings in the orchestra. I think just explore. Most alternate fingerings that I use stem from harmonics. So just have fun with exploring how to get that same note with different fingerings. I always encourage people actually to spend the last 5 minutes of their practice session just improvising, just making sounds, just getting away from the notes on the page and getting away from any fingering chart and just exploring what is possible on the instrument. I think it's enormously freeing. So I don't have a particular recommendation for alternate fingerings. Maybe I'll do a video on that if you ask me enough times. But just explore and have fun exploring the different colours on the instrument. And that's sort of related to the question just that Rachel Lau just wrote in, what do you love most about the flute specifically? Well, Rachel, I hope you're not going to find this answer disappointing, but it's not really the flute that I'm in love with. I love playing music and I can't imagine my life without music in it in some form or another. And I just really see the flute as being my voice. And anyone who's read any interviews that I've done in the past, you'll find out that the flute really sort of chose me. I didn't really choose it. I stumbled across it by accident, and I'm very happy that it's my voice, but I'm not a flute geek in that sense of the word. I hope that's not too disappointing an answer for you, Rachel. So let's get on to another audition-related question from Gita Bongers. I don't know how to pronounce your name. I hope that's something close. How do you choose which tempo you'll play your excerpt? Well, I covered this a little bit in the audition tips video, and I think there is no hard and fast rule. Do your research, listen to a lot of different recordings, because there's not only one truth. Never is there any one truth about music. There are lots of wrong answers maybe, but there are lots of right answers too. So do your research, believe in the tempo that you play, and I'm going to link actually that answer into the next question, which came from Jorgito Rivero. I hope that was something like close pronunciation. Should an excerpt be played in the same or different way in an audition than in the orchestra? And I'm going to relate that to the question from Gita about the tempo you'll play your excerpt. There are some excerpts, for example, what was a good one I thought about? Something like the Firebird, which in an audition, I would personally recommend that you play it just a touch slower than you would in the orchestra. It'll really just give you the possibility to make every note really clear and speak cleanly. So in that case, I would play it a little bit slower than the actual tempo that you would play it in the orchestra. And other things, something like, I'm thinking of the Bizet entr'acte. That might be an idea to play that a tiny bit, and I'm talking one metronome mark, one metronome click faster in the audition than in real life, just so that it keeps the flow and you're able to phrase beautifully and elegantly. But the answer, Gita, to your question, how do you choose a tempo? Do a lot of research, check obviously what's written in the score, make sure that's feasible. And in the audition tips video, I mention the Hindemith Symphonic Metamorphosen, where the printed metronome mark is much faster than it's ever done. So in that case, I would really play what's done and not what's printed. But as a general rule of thumb, I would start with what's printed and then do your research listening to different recordings, but make sure that you believe in the tempo you're playing. This was an excellent question from Woo Hoo Woo Woo. Should I play things differently if they're being asked again in the next rounds? I think that's an absolutely brilliant question. And I have no idea what the answer is. I think it really depends on what else is in the program. So taking a very specific example, a piece I just mentioned, I'm just having a look at the questions coming in. Staying calm, relaxed before a solo performs or orchestral solo. I'll come to that in a minute, Lily. So coming back to, should I play things differently if they're asked again in the next rounds? If you take a piece like, what shall we take? Something like the Carmen entr'acte. That's marked, if I'm not mistaken, pianissimo. Let's say that's together with something like Dvorak 8, which is marked piano at the beginning, and something like Petrushka, which is marked forte at the beginning. If then the Dvorak in the next round is asked again, but it's the softest piece that's asked, then maybe I would play it differently. Maybe I would really err on the pianissimo side, so that you're making sure that in the whole range of excerpts that you're playing for that round, that you've got your entire dynamic range covered. Similarly with staccato, legato. So that's why I suggest having a real, very clear game plan. Where am I going to show these different aspects of my playing in each round? And then if a piece comes back, which you weren't expecting, for example, something was taken from the first round to the second round, they might be just giving you another shot at it. If it's something like Volière or something like, what's another one, Peter and the Wolf or something like that, which are sort of, let's say, on the more dangerous side of things, they might be just giving you another chance. Or they might be wanting to hear how you play that piece in a different context. So look at the pieces around it in that round, and that might mean that you change the way that you play it. But having said all that, I do believe that if you have a strong conviction of how a piece should go, then why alter it at all in another round? Unless there's a specific reason, like I just mentioned. So we've had a question here from Lily Bryant. Hi from Australia. Do you have any tips for staying calm and relaxed before a solo performance or orchestral solo? Well, I'm going to refer this to an orchestral solo because this is about orchestral auditions. So we're going to keep it related to orchestral playing for the moment. And quite often in an orchestral context, you will have a little bit of time before a solo. And if I can, if it's at all possible, I take 2 slow breaths through my nose and out through my mouth. And it's only the 3rd breath which I'm really going to use for flute playing. Then I go through a quick sort of seated version of my body scan, which I did in an earlier video. And in that video, I confess to the fact that I hold quite a lot of tension in my bottom. And so when I'm sitting on the chair in the orchestra, as I'm doing those slow breaths through my nose, then I make sure that I send all the sort of relaxing messages to my bottom so that I'm feeling that there's a really flexible base on which the air can be based, if you like. So that's a sort of little routine that I go through if I've got time before a solo, and there usually is before a solo. But I have to say that I quite like the solos where there isn't too much time to think about it before. So something like actually Daphnis and Chloe, you're quite busy until right up to the moment of the solo. And in that case, I mean, even there you've got sort of 2 3/4 bars to get your head around the solo coming up. And so even then I would quite clearly chart out my breathing plan. So I would have a certain number of beats that I'm going to breathe in and going to breathe out. And try and stick to that. Your brain gets into, or my brain at least, gets into all kind of negative spirals if it doesn't have anything to do. So I quite like to have a good list of checkpoints, if you like. Where are my feet? How relaxed is my bottom? Where's the air coming from? Am I breathing as deeply and as slowly in as I can before this solo coming? All those kind of things. How relaxed are my shoulders? Where's my eye line, the sight line, if you like, to the conductor? How is my neck feeling? All those kind of things. So I like to have a little list of things that I can run through just before a solo, and I would do that even as something as short as the few bars rest before the Daphnis solo. I was doing Dvorak 8 a few weeks ago, and there you don't have any time at all. There you actually have to, well, I have to skip out a few notes before the solo starts. And so there you don't have any time at all to think about how you're going to prepare for the solo specifically. So then I would go through all that checklist in the passage at the beginning of the movement where the strings are playing and the flutes are just counting their bars rest. So I hope that answers your question, Lily. Just going to take a sip of water while I read. Sirius has a question. Hope this is not off topic, but do you have any tips on orchestral trials? What could we do or not do? Yes, trials. For those of you not in the UK, quite a normal system, the way things work in the UK and maybe in other countries, I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. Quite a usual way of things happening is, let's say, half a dozen people will be chosen from the audition and half a dozen people will be invited without an audition to come and play for a week. And those 12 people will do a week in the orchestra, and then the best 8 might be invited back for 2 weeks, and so on. Of course, it never works out quite as tidily as that, but something along those lines. And they do this to check not only how you play an audition, because as I mentioned at the beginning of the audition tips excerpt, an audition is a slightly weird, abstract occasion, and in a way it has very little to do with doing the job in the orchestra. And I think there are a couple of questions still which we'll come to about that question, that issue. And I think that in a trial, they're genuinely trying to see who would fit in best in the orchestra. So my very obvious answer would just be the best version of yourself you can be. Make sure you're on time, make sure you're well prepared, make sure you've got a pencil with you and maybe a rubber at the end of the pencil, and make sure that you ask your colleagues if they want a cup of tea in the interval, join them for a beer after the concert. I think it's a little bit like going and visiting your boyfriend or girlfriend's parents for the first time. You know, just try and be the best version of yourself you can be, I think. They already know that you're a wonderful player, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting there. And they're just trying to see quite genuinely whether you would fit in to the orchestral life that is in that orchestra. So don't try and 180 degrees turn yourself into a different person, because then life is going to be a little bit strange when you actually get the job. If you had to be like that to fit into the orchestra, then probably if you won the position on those grounds, then you would not feel comfortable when it came to winning the audition. So I hope that answers a little bit. Question from another Lily Yang. Did you ever hear contradicting opinions on how pieces excerpts are supposed to be performed when you were a student? If so, how did you decide in the end what your interpretation would ultimately be? Yes. Well, I think I've already mentioned it in this Q&A actually. There's not one right way. And I think whenever you're on stage, you have to believe in what you're playing. And I find that even in the orchestra, I remember years ago when I was teaching in the Hague Royal Conservatory, and I gave an orchestral class, and I would say that the tempo for such and such an excerpt would be like this, and make sure you do this and don't do that. And maybe a few weeks later I had to play it in the orchestra, and a conductor would ask me to do the opposite, different tempo, and do what I said don't do, and don't do what I said do. So there is not one right way. The only thing that's important is that you believe what you're playing at that one moment. And for me personally, one of the things that I absolutely love about playing in the orchestra, and I think my job is to sometimes make someone else's idea sound as if it's my idea. And I think that's a really exciting thing to be able to do. Sometimes a conductor doesn't say anything about a solo, and then you can play it the way that you want to play it. But I really love the challenge of being asked to play a completely different style, or different note lengths, or different dynamic pattern, or a different high point, or breathing maybe in a different place. So that's, for me personally, one of the things that I absolutely love about playing in the orchestra. Celine has asked a couple of times about rolling in the flute or rolling out the flute. Celine, I'm not answering that because I don't really know what you mean by that, to be honest. Rolling in the flute or out the flute changes the sound. So I don't really know whether you mean that to be intonation, or as a general thing, do I play with my embouchure quite closed or quite open? And these things are all relative. So I'm sorry for that completely unsatisfactory answer to your question. So let's get back to some of the questions I was sent in before. And this is Ruben Hunter Chin asked, for a second flute audition, are the panel listening for the same things as a first flute audition? And it's another excellent question. And I think in a way, yes, they're looking for the same thing. They're looking for an excellent player who understands the score and understands the function of their part in the entire orchestral score. Obviously, the second flute job is a different job from the first flute job. I find playing second flute absolutely terrifying. I've hardly done it, so I'm not very experienced in it. So whenever I have had to do it, I found it a lot more challenging than playing first. So I think that they're probably looking for a more flexible player, possibly. If you're auditioning as a second flute in an orchestra such as mine, where there are two principal flutes, my wonderful colleague Kirsten McCall and we play very, very differently. And the two wonderful flute players, Julie Moulin and Maria Semochuk and Vincent Kortvriend, have to learn to be able to play with us both and make that sound like a section. And so that requires extremely flexible playing skills in terms of dynamic, in terms of articulation. Generally speaking, a second flute audition will probably have more low flute excerpts, and you might well be asked still to play one of the big first flute solos. And that's fine, because a second flute has to be a soloist as well. So in a way, they're looking for the same thing, a musician who has got a good control of their instrument, who understands the score and is able to communicate that to an audience. At the bottom line, that's what they're looking for, but maybe for a second flute, more flexibility, and perhaps there would be more attention to the low register and maybe more attention to doubling. A second flute audition will almost always have an obligation to play some piccolo. So I think that's as much as I can answer that. And it's the same. John Moore Flute asked how to approach auditioning for principal versus second or third. And I think I've just answered that really in Ruben Hunter Chin's question. I hope you're happy with that answer. And let's see what the answers are. From Celine, I apologize for not pointing out exactly. I was talking about the embouchure. Yes, I understand, Celine, that you are talking about the embouchure, but I'm not sure whether you mean as a general rule, do I play as a turned in or more turned out, or do I use that to colour? As a general rule of thumb, I try and cover half the embouchure hole, more or less. But there will be times when I want to cover a bit more to create a special sound, or when I want to open the sound more to create a wider sound, less focus and less concentration, if you like. So I try and be quite flexible about the embouchure. If anyone's seen me playing, I actually quite often give the embouchure, the lip plate, a little lick before I start playing, a little wipe like that, so that I've got the flexibility to move quite a lot. So I quite like that flexibility, but I know colleagues who absolutely hate it. So there's not one right way. And a question from Richard Shaw. Hello, Richard. Be careful how you answer. Question about audition pianists. We can go that little bit too fast or too slow, but we're doing our best. Yes, I know. And Richard, you are absolutely the most wonderful, wonderful pianist to have behind you. I think any flute player who's lucky enough to have you in an audition has no problems at all. The question about a good audition accompanist is ears on stalks and just to be very flexible. And I would say to the flute player, I gave some notes in the audition tips video saying if you're playing a piece, maybe this doesn't apply to a Mozart concerto, but if you're taking your own piece, let's say the Huey Fantasy or something, do give your tempo, write your tempo in the piano part. It will help the pianist, and there's no shame at all in just giving a little hand gesture to show the sort of tempo that you're expecting them to play, and if it's a little bit too slow, then I'm sure that Richard would agree with me. They wouldn't be offended if you just said a little bit faster, please. And remember that the jury will see what's going on and will understand. So, you know, the jury's aware that you won't have had an audition, rehearsal before the audition. So think of all the means possible to help the pianist get to your tempo, because you're doing that, playing that piece together. Nadia, hello Nadia. How can you get into the right focus during the audition and not getting distracted in between the excerpts? Well, a really useful tip from Don Greene's book Audition Success, which I'll mention, I'll write the information about it down here below in the comments box. Don Greene writes a tip about having an image in front of you. Whenever you're playing l'après-midi, then you have that postcard of a Monet in front of you. And if you're playing Petrushka, you have that Picasso, a postcard of a Picasso painting in front of you, whatever it happens to be that works for you. So having an extra stimulus will really help. In this case, having an external stimulus through your eyes as well. Do make sure that you give yourself the challenge of saying, okay, I'm going to take 2 deep, slow breaths through my nose between excerpts, or I'm going to feel, where are my heels connecting to the ground between each piece. Those sort of taking yourself out of the music stand, if you like, and that sort of rabbit in headlights fear that we can sometimes have in an audition. So use as many stimuli as possible. Listen to the orchestra in your head. Think about where you're standing, how your feet are. Are you holding any tension in your bottom? That would be one of mine. Are your shoulders nice and relaxed? Is there space in your neck? Take 2 deep breaths, and then what am I going to say with this next excerpt? So another really useful tip from Don Greene's book is to have a trigger word, a key word. So that for the Mendelssohn, the sparkle. Okay, I'm going to sparkle in this piece. So I hope that helps, Nadia. There was another excellent question which I have misplaced here. I want to be able to credit who it was because it was such a lovely question. The question was, yes, from Sheryl Flute. What is the last thing you think before you walk into an audition room? And I think that I would say something like, remember that the audition panel is there looking for a new colleague. They're looking for someone with whom they are going to be playing music in the coming year, 10 years, the rest of their lives. You have to feel good in that orchestra. So make sure that you are yourself, that you believe everything that you say and do, and remember that they are just choosing someone to sit next to or behind or what have you. So sharing music is the bottom line. So give yourself a positive message, and I would even go as far as to say practice that positive message. A lot of this is sort of coming back quite a lot of times about all the nerves and the tempo and all those sort of things. We can maybe be much more conscious in our practice room and then have more tools to be able to take in to the audition room with us. Take the orchestra with you in your head, because the job you're doing is not playing on your own. The job you're doing is playing with other people, is communicating, is inspiring people, is being able to react. So if the pianist does something wonderful in a little a little link, that one of the tuttis in the Mozart concerto, then take that, be open to that, and take that and run with it, and communicate in the way that we do in the orchestra. It means that your musical antennae have to be absolutely on, fully extended and in all directions. And remember that it's all about music. I think that's what I would say about that. So I think I've gone through all the lists, all the questions that I picked out beforehand. If there are any more questions, I'll come to your question, Lily Yang, in a minute about practicing. I think all these questions have been answered. I've got one last question, which I thought would be a nice one to finish with, because it does tie up a few things. And that was from, now I've lost the order of all my pieces of paper, but it was a great question. Yes, from Flute and Amir. Do you remember anything from your first audition? If so, what was it like? Well, it was a very, very long time. I was a student in Paris and I did an extra work audition for the London Symphony Orchestra. And in my day in London auditioning, you had the choice to play a Mozart concerto, and sometimes you got the choice of G or D, and a contrasting piece. And I remember choosing, I think I chose the slow movement of the Mozart D major concerto, and I chose the last movement, or it could have been the first movement, I can't really remember, maybe both, and the last movement of the Prokofiev sonata. And in those days, auditions were basically pieces of music, orchestral repertoire were put on the stand until you collapsed. And I remember that I was in the audition room for a good 45 minutes and piece after piece was put in front of me. And the last maybe 10 or 5 minutes, I can't remember, was piccolo. And that was never my favourite sport. And I remember coming out of the audition absolutely exhausted. I'd also torn my Achilles heel, so I was in quite a lot of pain and couldn't move very much. But that was my very first audition, and they were very kind, but it took a very long time. And I was, as I say, in there for a good 45 minutes. And I got a very nice letter saying, let us know when you're back from Paris, where I was studying. And I don't know that I ever did write to say I'm back, because I wasn't quite sure whether that was a yes please or no thank you. And by the time I came back, I had quite a full diary of work, and I was terrified, I think probably, that they would ask me to play the piccolo, so I'm not sure that I took it any further. My next professional audition, that was my first professional audition. My second one was BBC National Orchestra of Wales, and my overriding memory about that was being asked to play the Mendelssohn Scherzo slower. They said that I played it far too fast. And then after that, the next audition was the Concertgebouw, and that was my first time of playing an audition behind a screen. So that was weird, because I hadn't even come across that in those days. So I hadn't done that in a tryout or anything. So that was quite weird, but I quite liked it. And then very peculiarly, I had to wait 3 months between hearing, I heard on the day of the round behind the screen that I was through to the final, but then I had to wait 3 months to play the final. So that was quite weird too. But that's the sum and total of my audition experience from that side of the curtain. And I've lost count of how many auditions I've been the other side of the curtain. In the meantime, some questions have come in. What does a typical practice session for you look like, and how do you go about structuring it? Lily, that's one of those how long is a piece of string questions. Some days I'm lucky to get half an hour in, and then I might just do some long notes with a tuning machine or some harmonics, or if I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, then I might just play some Bach. So it could go from that to being a full practice day for me is not generally more than about 4.5 hours, and I like to break it down into a good 4 sections, at least 4 sections. I spend a good chunk of time doing tone exercises, a good chunk of time doing articulation exercises, and a good chunk doing articulation. And then I might do some studies, just sort of taking an old study which I haven't practiced for 20 years and seeing if I can get it into any kind of shape in 45 minutes or something. And then the rest of the practice time might be for the pieces that I have to learn. If I don't have very much time learning an orchestral score, which I've played before and I know basically where the danger spots are, then I'll practice those danger spots and then listen to the whole symphony, because so much gets forgotten between performances. That might be the last time I played it was 6 or 8 or 10 years ago, maybe more. And whilst I will remember what the danger spots are, what I need to practice, listening to the entire symphony will actually help me much more when I go into the orchestra. So there is no such thing as a typical practice session, is the short answer to your question. Pierre Saint-Gervais asked about Baroque music. How is it possible to show your personality and at the same time to stick to a standard Baroque style? Well, firstly, I don't think there is a standard Baroque style, really. I think your personality, you're already showing personality by saying, I understand that this music might have to be played in a different style. That's already part of your musical personality. And I think that Baroque music, whilst there are lots of rules, I think that Baroque music, there's not less opportunity to be yourself as a musician. I think there are rules there which you need to know that you're breaking if you break them. But I would certainly suggest, if a piece like Bach aus Liebe appears on the program, I would certainly look into how much Baroque music the orchestra does and whether they work regularly with specialist conductors who are maybe used to hearing authentic instruments playing, because that means that they might work with the orchestra in a way that gives them more stylistic awareness than perhaps an orchestra that never works with those kind of conductors, perhaps. From Gail Heimer, in your video about the Mozart G concerto, you said from movement 1 to single tongue with about 120. Can you give us some tips and techniques for achieving that goal? Actually, keep watching this space, Gail, because one of my upcoming videos is going to be about articulation and articulation exercises. So I will be revealing my tips and tricks about articulation in that video. And then from Minwoo Hu, hello Emily, may I ask which edition is the most useful flute orchestra book from your opinions? I use 2 predominantly. I love Jeanne Baxstresser's book because it's got the orchestral part in the piano part, so you can actually, for yourself, if you can play some piano, you can get used to living with the harmonies, and that will tell you so much about playing the solo. Or you could even play them along with a pianist, of course. It just gives you that extra depth. The other book that I refer to most often in my personal orchestral life is Trevor Wise, the 2 big volumes of orchestral excerpts, because they cover not only a huge range of symphonic repertoire, but they've got lots and lots of concertos. Now, in the orchestra, concertos are very often rehearsed in minimum time, and they've got some quite tricky passages. So I think that Trevor has done a very good job of picking out not only the symphonic repertoire, but also the concerto repertoire, the accompanying repertoire. And I'm not only thinking about something well known like a Dvorak cello concerto, but all sorts of other concertos. Prokofiev is notorious. Tchaikovsky. Oh, there are lots and lots of concerto repertoire, which is, you'll probably never be asked for an orchestral audition, but it's really helpful to know where the trickiest spots are well ahead of time. So I do use that edition for getting a sort of heads up about what might be tricky coming up in that concerto. We're running out of time now, so I think thank you Brahms Flute for your time, for watching this video. So I think that if you've got any more questions, I will keep this film up online. I think I'm going to edit it in the next week or so and add some of the questions that people have asked me, and so you can see their videos in there. If you're watching and you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do that. And if you have subscribed and if you are watching, thank you so very much. I'm really deeply touched by all your comments. I read every single one and I do my very best to reply to every single one. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing this time with me on this, what is a sweltering day here in Amsterdam. And I wish you all the very best of luck for your orchestral audition. I consider myself extremely lucky. I think to be a orchestral player is just such a huge joy. From the very first time that I played in an orchestra, I knew that I wanted it to be a huge part of my life. Thank you for subscribing, and I really love it more, if that's possible, today than I did on the very first day that I played in an orchestra. So it really is a wonderful job, and I know that auditions have very little to do with doing the job. If I had a pound for a euro or a dollar for every time that someone had said, I can do the job in the orchestra, but I've just got to get through the audition, I know how you feel, and it is, yes, it's one of those things. It's not the most, it's not one of the most enjoyable parts of being a professional musician, but we do have to get through that stage in order to get into the orchestra. So do your very best to make it fun and interesting, and dig deep into the music, into the score. Listen, I can't stress that enough. Listen to the entire symphony, so that in that way, when you go into the audition, you'll take all those imaginary musicians with you, and it'll feel far less weird and less lonely. So thank you so much for sharing your time with me this afternoon. Keep in touch, keep your comments coming, and I hope this has helped. Cheerio, bye bye.